Lesson 3.5, Homeostasis Gone Awry. How does the satiety pathway relate to obesity? The goals of this lesson are to work through a primary scientific article using the QMDC method and to give students an opportunity to see and evaluate real scientific data. At the end of this lesson, students should be able to explain hunger and satiety signals, describe how overstimulation of the reward pathway leads to obesity, and analyze the scientific article. We'll achieve these goals by using the QMDC method to read a scientific article. To prepare for this lesson, you will need to review the key scientific concepts that will be presented throughout the lesson. These include the physiology of hunger, including the hormones released from the body that travel to the brain, and how those signals get interpreted by the hypothalamus. You can review the scientific content in the background reading provided for you in the teacher primer, the teacher manual, and the student workbook. The teacher primer provides in-depth knowledge about the scientific content presented in this lesson. The teacher manual or lesson plan provides a minute-by-minute explanation of the lesson structure, including instructions on how to manage the discussion and the activity. The student workbook provides additional explanations for students. You will need to print out one activity worksheet reading per student. Note that you may have already given students this worksheet as homework in Lesson 3.3. The key points of this lesson's do now are that when the body has sufficient nutrition, hormones are released that travel to the hypothalamus to tell us to stop eating. These hormones are insulin, leptin, and the peptide hormones. When our body needs more nutrients and calories, ghrelin is released from the stomach, which travels to the hypothalamus to tell us to eat more. We'll get there by having a discussion with the students. You will review the content learned from lessons 3.3 and 3.4 about the hunger and satiety pathways. This prepares them to discuss the scientific article and the activity. The key points of this lesson's activity are that all scientific articles have a similar structure that can be used to help navigate them. Individuals that have lost weight from dieting have higher levels of hunger signals compared to non-dieting people of equal weight. And treating food cravings by focusing treatment on the dopamine reward pathway may be a better long-term weight loss plan. We'll get there by reading a scientific article. The paper for this activity is called The Long-Term Persistence of Hormonal Adaptations to Weight Loss and is about how hunger and satiety hormones are altered when people lose weight from dieting. Students may have started reading this article as homework in Lesson 3.3. Depending on how your students did on getting through the reading on their own, this lesson may take 1 or 2 class periods. Caution: like most scientific articles, this reading may be challenging for students. Be sure to emphasize that it is not important to understand every detail about the paper. We are only interested in an overview of what was done and what was found. To help students focus on the most important details of this article, use the QMDC method. Q stands for question. What is the main question of this paper? M stands for method. How do they investigate this question? D stands for data. Each figure has its own QMDC. And C stands for conclusion. What conclusions can you make based on the data? Students should use the activity worksheet to take notes on the key points, which are Q, what is the main questions that the authors are asking? M, what are the methods the authors chose to address this question? D, what did the data show? Note that each table and graph has its own QMDC. And C, what conclusions did the authors make? You will also ask your students, what did the paper leave unresolved? What alternative explanations can be made for the findings? What methods could be used to resolve the alternative explanations? The worksheet is also asking students to write out the QMDC for each table and figure in the paper. You can review all of this information in the worksheet answer key. It has everything organized just as your students will be organizing it. Additionally, the teacher manual goes over the key concepts. The key point of this lesson's wrap-up is that high hunger signals after weight loss, even after a year, may be a cause for weight regain. We'll get there by having a short discussion. You will ask your students to connect how hunger signals may contribute to obesity. This is a tricky lesson for a few reasons. First, students can get frustrated by reading a scientific article because it is not like any other type of reading that they do. If this is the case, you may not want to assign this as the Lesson 3.3 homework and instead work through the paper together as a class. Students will have another opportunity to read a scientific article in Lesson 4.6. Second, some students may have a hard time interpreting the graphs. Go slow and concentrate on one axis and one participant group at a time. Third, like all scientific research, this paper doesn't answer all questions about hunger and weight loss, but only one part. Research is slow and moves one step at a time, and we often leave with more questions than we start. Some students will want to know all the answers after reading a scientific article, which just doesn't happen. Some students will wonder if the results of this study would be different if participants lost weight from exercise or gastric bypass rather than from diet alone. This is an excellent question. Exercise is associated with a short-term increase in some of the hormones that signal satiety, like PYY and GLP-1, but the long-term consequences are unknown, likely because it is hard to lose weight by exercise alone without also decreasing caloric intake. On the other hand, gastric bypass is associated with a reduction of ghrelin levels, which makes the gastric bypass patients feel less hunger between meals. At the end of this lesson, students should be able to explain hunger and satiety signals, describe how overstimulation of the reward pathway leads to obesity, and analyze the scientific article. There is a clear connection between Lesson 3.3 and this lesson, but what about Lesson 3.4 when we learned about the dopamine reward pathway? Although these authors didn't study the reward pathway, we saw in the Lesson 3.4 jigsaw that people can be addicted to food, and a lack of food leads to intense food cravings. It is likely that the study subjects here also experienced food cravings. By the end of the lesson, students should have a stronger appreciation for how difficult weight loss is and see why a simple dietary intervention is not enough to solve the obesity epidemic that we saw in Lesson 3.1. Don't forget that if you have any questions, concerns, or feedback, to let us know. You can contact any of the CTSE team members and we'll be happy to help.